Northern and western parts of Scotland on Sunday, but otherwise, again, most places dry, and we are going to see temperatures starting to rise through the weekend into next week. We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We're trying to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing this Friday with me, Mark Longhurst. Today, another packed show for you, covering all the stories that matter to you at home. Not all of it good news, I'm afraid, but we are delighted to welcome to the studio for the next 2 hours Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall and an old friend of GB News, to Chief Economic Advisor to the Centre of Business Research, Vicky Price, who herself, of course, has helped governments wrangle with inflation and recession. Well, here's what's coming up in this next hour. In the latest television debate, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak last night clashing on the warnings from the Bank of England of a deep and impending prolonged recession. We'll be getting the latest throughout the programme in this race for number 10, the candidates facing the worst economic prospects, it seems, for decades. And then, in this last hour, a leaked video shown by the New Statesman appearing to show Rishi Sunak boasting of taking money from deprived urban areas to help wealthy towns such as Tunbridge Wells. He said Labour had shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, but, quote, that needed to be undone, close quotes. Could this actually now undo his own campaign? China has restarted military drills off the coast of Taiwan as Beijing continues to rail against Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island. Well, we'll be speaking to a military expert on just how the war games could turn into a direct confrontation if it goes wrong. And here, as migrant crossings across the Channel continue to break all records, we'll be heading to Dover, where our Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White will be telling us the very latest. And don't forget to give us your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions. Email us gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 12 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The family of Archie Battersby have lost a High Court bid to have him transferred to a hospice to die. The 12-year-old's family had pledged to fight to the end so he could spend his final moments with dignity. Archie's been in a coma since April and has been the subject of a lengthy legal battle to continue his life support. The family have been given until 2 o'clock today to lodge a challenge with the Court of Appeal. The two candidates vying for the Conservative Party leadership position have clashed over warnings of a recession. The Bank of England predicts the UK will face its longest recession since the financial crisis in 2008, as it increased interest rates by half a point to 1.75%. The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak warned his rivals' economic plans would damage the country, but Liz Truss says the most important thing is getting the economy growing to avoid a recession.
The reality is we are facing a recession if we carry on with our business as usual policies. We need to do more, and that's why I'm determined to reform the economy and keep taxes low. If there is a recession, that will mean people losing jobs, that will mean more economic hardship. So that is why it's so important that we do all we can to grow the economy.
Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak says he wants to be honest with the country about the economic challenges ahead.
I'm not sitting here or standing here promising you tens and tens of billions of pounds of goodies straight away, because I don't think that's the right thing to do for our economy. I think it's risky. I think it risks making the inflation problem far worse and costing you all far more. I want to be straight with the country about the challenges we face and what is going to be required to fix them. And that's why I think you can trust me on this, because I'm prepared to do that, even though it's going to cost me politically.
Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer has been found to have breached the MP's code of conduct by failing to declare several interests, including gifts from football teams. Parliamentary Standards opened an inquiry into the Labour leader in June after claims he was late in declaring earnings and hospitality from UK sources. The Commissioner has found Sir Keir failed to register 8 interests in total, but the breaches were minor and there was no deliberate attempt to mislead. Network Rail has voted to accept a pay offer after several strikes and disputes over pay and conditions. The Transport Salaried Staffs Association says its managers have accepted the offer, which includes a 4% increase on base pay from the 1st of July and discounted travel for employees. But the union has said it will stay in talks with Network Rail to continue delivering a fair deal for its members going forward. A migrant in a kayak has been rescued from the English Channel this morning. Border Force picked the man up around 5 miles off the coast of Kent after he'd paddled across from France overnight. He's been taken to the processing centre in Dover for medical checks. He was one of around 1,200 migrants who crossed the Channel in just 2 days this week. China's foreign ministry has announced the country is severing a number of diplomatic ties with the United States, including top-level military following a visit by US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. The country has also sanctioned Ms. Pelosi and her immediate family, accusing her of interfering in China's internal affairs and threatening the peace and stability of Taiwan. Beijing has launched a number of missiles into waters near Taiwan in response to the visit, saying the US is playing with fire. US media reports the White House has summoned the Chinese ambassador to condemn the escalating tensions. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the differences between the US and Taiwan need to be resolved peacefully.
The fact is, the Speaker's visit was peaceful. There is no justification for this extreme, disproportionate, and escalatory military response. It is incumbent upon China to continue to seek to resolve those differences peacefully, not to use coercion, and certainly not to use force.
And a hosepipe ban for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight comes into force today. Southern Water says the country is experiencing one of the driest years on record, with river flows about 25% lower than they should be at this time of year. So it's asking customers to limit their water usage until further notice. The measure will follow next week for South East Water customers in Kent and Sussex. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to the briefing with Mark.
Simon, thanks very much. So, as we've just heard, Tory leadership rivals Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss setting out competing plans to deal with the economic recession heading our way. Forecast, of course, yesterday by the Bank of England. And this all comes in their latest TV clash with Rishi and Liz. Unfunded tax cuts would pour fuel on the fire on inflation, but Liz Truss saying a recession was not inevitable if bold action was taken. She was speaking with the reporters earlier today, and this is what she had to say then.
They're even more important, because what we need to do is make sure we get the economy growing. That's why it's so important we don't raise corporation tax and we attract investment right across the United Kingdom. And I'm here in the city today talking about how we can change our rules on investment, Solvency II, which is an old EU rule, replace that so we can turbocharge investment across the country, including more manufacturing investment in places in the north of England. Well, the reality is we are facing a recession if we carry on with our business as usual policies. And people are struggling, whether it's to pay food bills or fuel bills. That's why it's very important that we reverse the national insurance increase, that we have a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy to help people with their fuel bills. But the most important thing is getting the economy going so we avoid a recession. And the business as usual policies aren't working. We need to do more. And that's why I'm determined to reform the economy and keep taxes low. It wasn't a central part of my policy programme, and there were concerns expressed about the impact, which wasn't intended, of the policy. And I thought it was much better to be clear that we're not proceeding with that policy.
Well, Liz Truss, they're talking a little about the levelling up policy. This extraordinary development now in this past hour, some breaking news coming through about what Rishi Sunak has said. A clip being published by the New Statesman has him speaking to party followers in Tunbridge Wells down in Kent, not exactly the most deprived of areas, saying that Labour had shoved all funding into deprived urban areas, telling his supporters there that that needed to be undone. I have started doing that. Levelling down, maybe, instead of levelling up. Let's bring in Conservative MP Richard Graham, who is backing Rishi Sunak to become Prime Minister. Mr. Graham, thank you for your time. I don't know if you've had time to catch up with this. It is just the New Statesman at the moment that's got it. But, I mean, it's not just shooting yourself in the foot. It's blowing your head off as well, isn't it?
Well, no. I mean, the great thing is levelling up is happening in urban seats like mine, which is relatively deprived in economic terms, though very proud in other ways. And what Rishi's message is all about is spreading the levelling up agenda across all parts of the United Kingdom, not leaving out rural places or pockets of places like Tunbridge Wells, which will also have their areas of deprivation. So it's about levelling up, but more widely than was the case in the past.
You're trying to tell us that Tunbridge Wells is more deprived than urban areas in the north of England, the so-called Red Wall constituencies?
No, that's not the point at all. The point is just that every area has its pockets of deprivation, including in Westminster. And so levelling up does not just mean that there will be a few places in the north of England that get helped. It will help poorish cities like my own here in Gloucester, and it will help those parts of rural areas, like in the Forest of Dean nearby, that also need levelling up help. It's going to be about the whole country.
You say, I mean, many areas outside the urban centres, of course, have deprived parts of the population. But I'm just looking specifically at what he said here in Tunbridge Wells about Labour shoving funding into deprived urban areas. That needed to be undone. I mean, we take it from those words that that money would be shifted elsewhere.
No, I don't take that in that way at all, because we've just put in our second bid for the Levelling Up Fund, and I'm confident that it will be received positively, and it will be the same with other parts of the country like Stoke and further north as well. But what it does mean is that places like Tunbridge Wells, with its pockets of deprivation, won't be excluded. That's the key thing, is that there is a lot of feeling in the south that levelling up is an agenda for moving money from the south to the north. It's not. It's about spreading it everywhere where it needs to be spread, to the right places.
A little bit more indication about how things will be handled now by Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, but you will know that the director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, Paul Johnson, has warned that neither candidate has actually addressed what's now an absolutely urgent priority. That is, the billions having to be found to support households and industry, given the projected energy increases and the recession on our way.
Yeah, well, I think the seriousness of the situation is clearer to the whole population as a result of the rise in interest rates yesterday from the Bank of England, and what's that is going to mean for many people's mortgages and their own cost of living. So, yes, everything that Rishi has been saying about the importance of squeezing down inflation in the same way that Lawson and Thatcher did this in the early 80s is coming true faster than anyone could have predicted. This is a really serious situation, so a crisis budget by whichever candidate succeeds is really important.
Mr. Graham, thank you for your reaction, if that's what we can call it, to what Mr. Sunak has said. We'll see what others react in terms of those words, but thank you for your time. Let's bring in both Claire and Vicky here in the studio. Welcome to you both. It's going to be interesting to see what the reaction from others is to what Rishi Sunak has said. First, I mean, we obviously haven't seen the clip as yet, but just to react to his words about, that needs to be undone. I mean, is it campaign over for Sunak?
I don't think it's campaign over, and I do think that Richard Graham has a point, that places in the south and the southeast, like the ward I represent, which is in Sevenoaks, which, again, not dissimilar to Tunbridge Wells, you wouldn't think there's deprivation, but there is. It's a rural community. The place that I look after is a small village. And we have problems. Wages are low, the transport is not great, it's very expensive, but we come under Sevenoaks. So everybody thinks that we live in £2-3 million houses. However, having said that, it was a clumsy attempt to shore up support for your team in Tunbridge Wells, a place that is synonymous for high house prices, well-to-do people sending their kids off to independent schools. So the whole point that he was trying to make will be lost because everybody will see that he is only trying to look after his own.
And a gift to his opposite camp, the Liz Truss camp, and a gift to Labour as well.
Of course it is, because it falls into all of those stereotypes of what a Tory government will do. It will look to look after their own. That is what is going to be put out there by the Labour Party. It isn't true. But that's all anyone's going to read from it. OK, well, welcome to you both.
And as a thank you, as a prize for you to coming on, I'm actually going to give you some new jobs. I'm going to make you Governor of the Bank of England, if you don't mind, for the moment, Vicky. And I'm going to make you the new Prime Minister as well, because you've obviously started setting out that stall. A bit of a joke, but there is actually a reason to do this, because quite clearly, as the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said, neither candidate seems to have addressed what is now a really urgent problem, according to the Bank of England. And, as Suella Braverman has said, an indication that perhaps the bank hasn't handled things as well as they should have. If you were now Governor of the Bank of England, would you have put interest rates up by 0.5%? And would you have actually indicated there's more to come, given we're also about to have a recession?
Yes, I would. I have been supporting what the Bank of England had done until now, whereas quite a lot of people have been saying it's been behind the curve, should have increased interest rates earlier, should have reduced the quantitative easing earlier, and all that sort of stuff. But in fact, we were in a situation where the government, the fiscal side, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, as was, needed the support of the Bank of England in order to be able to do this fiscal expansion that he did during COVID. If the Bank of England hadn't done what it did, lowered interest rates and put huge amounts of liquidity into the system, mainly through buying bonds in the secondary market, so basically Sunak and the budget management office, which exists in the Treasury, issues those bonds.
850 billion in total, I think, something like that?
But that wasn't, of course, during that period. A lot of it started with the financial crisis.
Well, it's a big bill to pay off.
Well, we never pay it off, so forget that.
All right.
So without that, there would never have been the ability for Rishi Sunak to borrow at the rates that he did, which is quite low, and in the size that he had to do. 300 billion one year, 150 billion the next year. So the Bank of England had done the right thing. Towards the end, that is the question really that you asked in terms of what you needed to have done. What now needs to happen, mainly because of the war in Ukraine and the international factors coming in and energy prices going up, he needed to send an indication that prices will be under control at some point. So watch it. We're not just leaving the whole thing completely out of intervention.
This is the point where Mr. Bailey has indicated, look, it's Russia, it's the situation in Ukraine, we can't control it, and that's what's really stoking inflation because of the energy costs. Given that, squeezing the economy is not going to have an effect on that situation in Ukraine. What it is going to squeeze the rest of the economy with it.
I agree with that. And that's one way in which you can get the sort of domestic bit of that inflation perhaps coming under control. What he's arguing, which makes reasonable sense right now, but I'm not hugely in favour of raising interest rates very significantly from here on, but what he has argued is that if we don't do something to stop the inflation becoming embedded when the other international factors come down, and therefore energy prices fall, etc., then we'll be into a higher inflation territory for a long period to come, and that's what he's trying to do.
OK, Claire, our new Prime Minister. So this is the intro that you've got on September the 6th. You've got experts from the IFS saying you're stuffed, basically. There's no money to help industry or householders. The 30 billion that we were told headroom, the piggy bank, has disappeared. What on earth do you do?
Not cut taxes. That is the one thing that I would say that Rishi Sunak has got right, is that we cannot afford to drop taxes, to keep borrowing. I'm sure Vicky will correct me on this, but to keep borrowing and to keep adding to the debt is not a sensible way forward. It's not a fiscal conservative
Which
move.
is the Liz Truss approach, wasn't it?
Absolutely is. And just spending out on infrastructure projects without funding them, and then dropping the NI increase, which was meant to pay for social care, even though we understand that it wasn't ring-fenced. You can't keep doing that. You cannot keep borrowing against growth that you hope will happen. Now, surely you have to be competent enough to say, at the moment, we have to hold hard, and this is going to be hard. This is going to be really tough for a lot of people. However, in the future, it may be better. But I don't think that anybody should be making any promises now about tax cuts. I really don't.
Given that, the political consequences, we could have a general election in less than 2 years, maybe 18 months. We'll be coming out of a really deep, painful recession. Is this really the end of any hope of a Tory party being re-elected to government in the next general election?
No, I don't think it is. I think sometimes you have to make really hard choices in politics. You have to make really unpopular decisions. And I know politicians don't like that. They want to be popular, they want to be liked. But it's not going to do anybody any favours in the long run if you just keep promising what they want to hear. I think if you keep your message, you keep your cool, people will stick with you. And it is going to be hard. I'm not going to make any assumptions about how easy an election will be, because it's not going to be.
Yeah, and just to return to the governor very quickly, Suella Braverman said you were late on parade, that you were asleep at the wheel. Does that mean that the bank may actually go a bit too far the other way to try and regain credibility?
Well, it might. What, in fact, we heard from Bailey today is that, of course, you'd be prepared to discuss, the role of the bank and all that sort of stuff. But remember, the bank has had operational independence, but the target, the 2% inflation, is set by the government.
Yes.
And they have to report and write a letter to the Chancellor if it goes either above for too long or below for too long. A lot
of letters going to be written.
Absolutely. A lot of explanation needs to be given. The external members are appointed and approved by the Treasury and the Treasury Select Committee. The chief economist of the Treasury sits on these monetary policy decisions. So it's not as if they're doing things which are completely outside the control of the government in any case. So I think it's a discussion that hopefully will be very short-lived if there is such a discussion between the bank and the new Chancellor, whoever it is.
Well, thank you to both for the moment. I hope you're enjoying your new jobs. We shall see you by the end of 2 hours. Also coming up, more reaction to the Tory leadership race. David Cameron's former advisor, Philip Blond, joining us. Before that, let's take a short break and an update on the weather ahead of the weekend.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather outlook. Not much rain in the forecast across the south. A dry one here today and sunny for most of us through this weekend, thanks to a large area of high pressure that's slowly moving in across the country, and it's going to stick around through the weekend and beyond. This weather front will bring a bit more cloud tomorrow across the north. And today across the north, we do have some showers. We've already seen 1 or 2 heavy ones and a scattering of showers over North Wales, northern England and parts of central and eastern Scotland will continue. Hit and miss, not everywhere seeing them, but where they do occur, so the odd heavy one is possible, but tending to ease off, I suspect, through the afternoon. Sunny spells for western Scotland, Northern Ireland and across the south, where temperatures getting into the mid-20s, high teens, low 20s for most. So actually a little cool for the time of year. It'll be a fairly cool evening as well. Still a few showers around this evening if you're heading on the roads across northeast England, eastern Scotland, but they'll quickly fade away. For most, it's going to be a dry night, but that weather front we saw earlier will start to bring the rain back to the highlands of Scotland and the Western Isles through the early hours. A fresh start to the weekend. It really will be quite a cool night, certainly compared to earlier in the week. Temperatures widely down to single figures. A sunny start to the weekend, certainly for most of England and Wales. A cloudy start for Scotland and Northern Ireland. There will be some rain pushing through parts of Scotland, but come late morning, it'll mostly be confined to the far north, with just a few showers likely through the central belt. The odd shower for Northern Ireland, mostly dry here. Certainly sunny spells for the majority across England and Wales. And after a cool start, feeling pretty warm from mid-morning onwards into the mid-20s through the afternoon. On Saturday evening, again, most places set fair, just a bit more of that rain lingering across northern Scotland, where it'll also be fairly breezy. There'll be some patchy rain across northern and western parts of Scotland on Sunday, but otherwise, again, most places dry, and we are going to see temperatures starting to rise through the weekend into next week.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to The Briefing with me, Mark Longhurst. This Friday it's just gone 12:25 and we're sticking with today's top story, the race for number 10 and what on earth a new Prime Minister will be able to do to stave off that year-long recession and the pain of higher interest rates that we were given yesterday. Well, Liz Truss claims her tax cut plans could avert a looming recession, making this once again the central plank of her plans for the economy as she appeared in last night's television debate. Appearing shortly after, former Chancellor Rishi Sunak stepped up his attack on the Truss tax plan, saying such unfunded cuts would be leading to misery for millions. But then the breaking news in this past hour, where the New Statesman has a clip of him speaking in Tunbridge Wells, basically saying that he would be undoing, as he said, funding for deprived urban areas where Labour had shoved all the money into those areas, saying, I have started doing that. Let's get some more reaction now. Joining us, former advisor to David Cameron, Philip Blond, joining us. Philip, thanks very much indeed for talking to us this lunchtime. I don't know if you've seen this clip yet, but clearly a lot of Sunak party advisors and those behind the scenes will be thinking, how on earth do we get this back on track?
Well, I don't think you do. I think it's the latest bit of evidence that shows Sunak was never serious about levelling up. I mean, I was talking to Boris Johnson about the Treasury's resistance to his wishes to level up at a much grander scale. And I think it shows the poverty of his approach. I mean, there is no future for a Conservative Party that doesn't cater to its majority, and its majority isn't in Tunbridge Wells. I might be in Tunbridge Wells, but I am not the majority of the Conservative Party. They are now in the north, and they desperately need levelling up because they've been abandoned by all parties really since the 1970s, and they need investment at a grand scale. And Boris Johnson was frustrated by Sunak's antipathy to levelling up. And here I think we can see why. And I think it's the final nail in his leadership coffin, if we can put it like that.
We were hearing from Richard Graham, Conservative MP, that he was trying to explain, well, all that Rishi is doing is emphasising the fact that there are many other areas deprived, particularly, he put in Kent, Tunbridge Wells. I mean, I don't know how you feel about deprivation there in the Garden of England.
We are not deprived in Tunbridge Wells. Quite the contrary. We have one of the highest, I think, per capita incomes in the county. There are parts of Kent that are deprived, but it's certainly not Tunbridge Wells. And, I'm all for improving all parts of the country, but it's really hard to have a sympathetic reading of these remarks. And I always feared that if Sunak got the job, it would be a version of George Osborne Part 2, but without the concern for the North. And I just don't see how he can govern a nation when he has such a narrow austerity agenda that won't serve the majority, won't speak to the country's needs. I mean, that's not a recipe for leadership. That's a recipe for loss.
Up on something you said I thought was quite interesting, Osborne Mark II, because clearly a lot of people actually think that the Cameron-Osborne relationship, number 10 and number 11, worked quite well, even if there's now a question about how far austerity went.
I think, look, I'm a Conservative, but I've long argued for a different form of conservatism than we have. And I think you have to say we haven't had a particularly successful Conservative government since Cameron was elected. We had an overreaction to austerity. It went too far, damaged too much, and not least the union of the country, and very little gain really to show for it. And it speaks to the current poverty of the imagination that with the enormously new majority that Boris Johnson got for the Conservative Party, that we haven't been able to come up with anything other than small bits of money that areas in the north have to compete for. I mean, that's inadequate. The advantage of Liz Truss is I think she gets this. She has at least, thank goodness, said she'll restore the link in HS2 to Leeds. And she's aware of the need for devolution. I've spoken with her before about this, and I think she has a much broader, she's more aware of the needs of the country than clearly Sunak is. That would be my take. And I think what we have to ask, though, is much deeper questions of the Conservative Party. They've failed to speak to the collapse in British productivity, the stagnation of the economy from the financial crisis onwards. These are the questions we need to put to them.
Well, thank you very much indeed for... I mean, we used to joke about yours disgusted Tunbridge Wells about the letters to the Times. You're not quite disgusted, but...
Well, I am disgusted in Tunbridge Wells to hear that remark. I find it profoundly depressing that we are still, as a Conservative Party, catering to the wealthy in the South East when you know what, they're going to vote Lib Democrat.
Right.
It's the North that will vote Tory.
Philip, I'm going to thank you there because we've actually got, I think, now this clip coming in just to put you in the picture again after strong criticism, of course, of Liz Truss's plans to cut public sector pay in the regions. Rishi Sunak now appears to have been caught out while campaigning, seemingly saying he would move funding from poorer areas into wealthier places such as Tunbridge Wells, as we've just been discussing. The video obtained by the New Statesman magazine. Let's see what he's saying.
Managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
Well, let's get a reaction here in the studio with Claire and Vicky once more. Claire, I'll turn to you as Conservative councillor. I mean, is this his obituary?
I don't think it's his obituary, but I really am concerned that there is very little he can come back with. I don't see how you defend comments like that. Yes, there are pockets of deprivation in the southeast. It doesn't make it...
Philip Blond telling us not down there in Tunbridge Wells.
Absolutely not down there in Tunbridge Wells. It's, you know, it's across the sort of Medway Towns area and down towards the coast. But you cannot put that in comparison to places, you know, Salford in Manchester and up towards Sunderland. We are not like that. And to say that you're going to undo something that is meant to be for the good of people and bring up their living conditions, I'm not sure how you come back from this. Hopefully there's a very clever spin doctor, but I'm not seeing it.
Right. Vicky, the other, you know, let's just repeat the fact we've made you Governor of the Bank of England for the day, and Claire's our new Prime Minister. But looking at the fiscal bit, which is outside the bank's remit, of course, I mean, how on earth do you actually generate more money at the moment to help urban areas and to regain that red wall? I mean, we're being told now, effectively, that 30 billion headroom, the piggy bank we had, will have just gone out the window. Well,
it will have gone out of the window, not just because of the slowdown in the economy, but also, if you look at Liz Truss's promises, if you reduce corporation tax again, so you don't actually go back to what was intended to happen, which would be the corporation tax increases very significantly.
At 19% instead of 25%.
Absolutely, next year, which is meant... And if you do something about the national insurance contribution, particularly for employers, because, of course, you've already given something back to employees by increasing the threshold when you start paying national insurance contributions. So half of what they were going to lose has come back. Then you lose your headroom. So it's gone, even though you have probably been collecting an awful lot more, and I'm sure that the IFS and will have looked at that.
VAT and things like that?
Right, VAT, interestingly enough, if you look at what happened in the last year that just finished in you know, a few months ago, in the financial year, it was something like, if I remember correctly, because I don't have the figures in front of me, at least 20 billion higher than it was in the last year pre-pandemic. Because, of course, prices had gone up.
Yeah, higher fuel prices,
exactly.
More VAT take.
So you can collect, so you can do some redistribution.
Right.
So there's a little bit there, but otherwise, I'm afraid, you borrow, and you have to accept the fact that the economy is in crisis. You're going to have to step in with a big package pretty quickly.
Yeah. Claire, I've given you the job of Prime Minister, but I've failed to ask, do you want the job?
I'm not sure I would do the job in that well, if I'm honest. I think I would have to be one of those people that says, respectfully, I would step in the background.
It's a poison chalice, isn't it?
It is a poison chalice. You're never going to please everybody. You're going to be unpopular all of the time. I'm quite happy with that, but I think I would stay in the background.
Tunbridge Wells.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you both for the moment. Of course, more reaction and analysis to come. Next, we're heading to Dover, the latest on the Channel crossings there. The numbers up yet again, we're being told. First, let's get a news update with Simon.
Thanks, Mark. It's 12:35. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The family of Archie Battersby have lost a High Court bid to have him transferred to a hospice to die. Archie's been in a coma since April and has been the subject of a lengthy legal battle to continue his life support. The family have been given until 2 o'clock today to lodge a challenge with the Court of Appeal. The two candidates vying for Conservative Party leadership have clashed over warnings of a recession. The Bank of England predicts the UK will face its longest recession since the financial crisis in 2008, as it raised interest rates by half a point to 1.75%. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak warned his rival's economic plans would damage the country, but Liz Truss argued her plans provided the bold action needed to tackle rising prices. A video has emerged showing Tory leadership hopeful Rishi Sunak telling a campaign event that as Chancellor he diverted government funding from deprived urban areas towards more affluent towns. In a video obtained by the New Statesman, the comments were made to grassroots Conservatives in Tunbridge Wells in Kent 7 days ago. In response, Mr Sunak's team has defended the comments, saying he altered the formula to help both towns and rural areas.
Managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
China's foreign ministry has announced the country is severing a number of diplomatic ties with the United States following US House of Representatives Speaker to Taiwan. The country has also sanctioned Nancy Pelosi and her immediate family, accusing her of interfering in China's internal affairs and threatening the peace and stability of Taiwan. Beijing has launched a number of missiles into waters near Taiwan in response to the visit, saying the US is playing with fire. US media reports the White House has summoned the Chinese ambassador to condemn the escalating actions. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Mark.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We're trying to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Now, a migrant has been rescued from a kayak in the English Channel this morning after trying to paddle across from France overnight. One of around 1,200, we're being told, crossing the Channel in just 2 days this week. Well, this comes as both Tory leadership candidates say they're committed to tackling what's called the small boats crisis. Well, joining us with the very latest now from Dover, Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, clearly this is high season, August, because I guess of the weather and sea conditions.
Yes, although this week actually, Mark, because of the prevailing winds out in the Channel, only 2 days have been passable in terms of their availability for small boats. But in those 2 days, as you said, 1,200 people have crossed the Channel. And news, of course, of this extraordinary development overnight with one migrant who actually paddled across most of the 22 miles or so from Dover, set off overnight and was finally rescued by Border Force about 5 miles off Dover. His kayak was taken here to Dover Harbour, then he was taken up the gangway as well, sent to the processing centre here for medical and other checks before he's then put into the asylum system. One of 1,200 people who have crossed, as I say, in just 2 days. It is an issue, of course, it is uppermost in the minds, we're told, of the Tory leadership candidates who say, Mark, that they are determined to get a grip on this crisis. Well, previous Prime Ministers and Home Secretaries haven't been able to do it. I'm not sure exactly what their plans amount to in terms of their ability to be able to stop this passage of people that just continues to grow month after month, year after year.
I suppose we should reflect that, ending up in Rwanda does not seem to be deterring people from, an extraordinary attempt, as you say, with a kayak. I mean, you've got to be pretty desperate to try that out.
Yes, and the fact is we are looking last year was about 28,500 people who crossed the channel. We're probably on to double that figure again this year. There is no end in sight to what is a highly lucrative trade for the criminal gangs on the other side of the channel, taking advantage of people who are very desperate for whatever reason to get to the United Kingdom. I just want to show you while we're here, Mark, where we are down at Dover Harbour. This is the gangway here where you see people coming up all the time now, very familiar images. And just down here in the water there are these small boats. Now, they are bought in Turkey, made to order effectively. They're pretty flimsy plastic rubbery molds with wooden planks along the bottom to give them some kind of rigidity. Then they're taken to Germany where they're partially constructed, and then they're driven to the coast along northwestern France where they're properly assembled, hidden then in the sort of undergrowth in the bushes along there, and then when the weather is good, as I say, it's only been good on 2 days this week, Mark, they're then taken out into the sea to make that channel crossing. Both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss tell us, Mark, that they are still committed to the Rwanda deal. They want to make it work, but the sticking point, of course, is the European Convention on Human Rights. Both candidates say that they have a plan to ensure that the courts here can rely on other legislation, United Nations asylum legislation, which is much more focused and will stop the kind of repeated appeals that we see on the grounds of right to a family life and the like. We'll see if it makes a difference. As I say, it is a problem that continues to grow.
Mark, down in Dover, thanks very much for updating us and showing us the latest arrivals there and extraordinary numbers, 1,200 as you were saying in this past week. Thanks for the moment. Back to you, of course, a little later. But let's get the views in the studio now of Claire and Vicky still with us. I mean, that underlines not just a kayak, but you see those flimsy craft that, you know, they are willing to risk everything. But one wonders why the French authorities are not picking up, if it's that well known, how they're doing it.
It does. Now, I've had the joy of spending an evening in January on the beach in Calais, looking at the coastline, looking across at Dover. It looks so close. You think you could, you know, do that very easily. They have got a problem with the length of coastline.
Yes.
It is enormous. However, they will know where the pinch points are. The French will know exactly which part of the beach is more likely
and
to
who
have...
the gangs are, the criminal gangs organising.
Of course. And that's what needs to be cracked down on. You need to look at people selling the boats. And whenever I've made this suggestion before, people laugh at me. But if you find out where the boats are coming from, as we've now just found out, Turkey and Germany, then you start busting those lines of communication. And then you start looking at the gangs that are operating out of the wider European area, not just in France, but across all the way over to places like Bulgaria and Hungary. Start looking at those and you start tracking where the people are coming from. You can stem this.
Vicky, the other aspect, as Mark was touching on, is that Rwanda doesn't seem to be frightening them too much.
No, absolutely. But it's interesting when you look at the cost, of course, of doing what has been planned in terms of moving people to Rwanda. First of all,
the flights, the hotels, and
in reality, there isn't that much capability in terms of the numbers that one can send to.
Yeah, we've got 17,000 people have arrived in the UK in 2022. I mean, how are you going to move all 17,000 to Rwanda?
Well, I don't think they have the space for that for the moment. We're going to have to pay a lot more money to make more places available. And of course, as we know, once you get there too, they can just move out, which a number of them have done in previous attempts, because there are other countries that are using Rwanda anyway. But the interesting thing is that since we're talking about the costs, and of course, for the purposes of today, I'm supposed to be the governor of the Bank of England.
Yes,
rather than the Chancellor.
You're doing very well.
But nevertheless, you know, what happens on the fiscal side affects very much what happens on the monetary side, as we know.
Fiscal being tax, monetary being interest rates,
Yes, fiscal is also spending.
It's
tax and spend. And fiscal is, and monetary is interest rates and money supply more generally. What we know is that the department, it must have been now Rwanda's Home Office. The idea came from Priti Patel.
Yeah.
Or perhaps not just from her. But anyway.
But within the Home Office.
The department, as far as I understand it, did the cost-benefit analysis of the Rwanda idea and found that it didn't make sense financially. And they had to get a direction. If you know what direction means, it is that...
To force it through.
Yes, the department says, we can't justify that. It's not going to pass the audit, the National Audit Office scrutiny. It's not going to pass the scrutiny of the Parliament. As you know, there is a Public Accounts Committee.
Yeah.
So what we need is a direction from the Secretary of State to say, I don't care, let's go ahead.
Do it anyway.
Do it anyway.
And
that's
this was because of the cost of the air corridor to get the flights going to...
Mostly, but also, more generally, that
Yeah.
there are cheaper versions of doing something with the migrants than that. And perhaps what Claire was saying may well be the cheaper options.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your reaction to that for the moment. More to come from both of you, but let's actually head back to the leadership election now with Liz Truss backtracking on her comments about ignoring Nicola Sturgeon as the Scottish leader, now making clear she would be prepared to work with her on some issues. Well, this is the second time this week the Foreign Secretary has been forced into a campaign U-turn. Let's remind ourselves of what she said at a hustings in Exeter when asked about Scotland's First Minister.
I feel like I'm a child of the Union, that I really believe we are a family and we're better together. And I think the best thing to do with Nicola Sturgeon is ignore her. I think she's... I'm sorry.
It's a bit difficult when she's First Minister, though. She's got a democratically elected position, just as you would.
I'm sorry, she's an attention seeker, Seb. That's what she is. And what we need to do is show the people of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales what we are delivering for them, and making sure that all of our government policies apply right across the United Kingdom.
So that was her at that hustings. Attention seeker, we need to ignore her. Let's get the views of former advisor to Ruth Davison, Nick Cook. Baroness Davison, of course, as she is now being the former Tory leader in Scotland. Nick, we've had a row back from blue on blue attacks. Now it seems also a row back on blue on tartan attacks.
Yeah, some may think that. I actually think she was perfectly clear, Liz Truss, in terms of her remarks and what she actually meant. Let's remind ourselves that she was talking to a Conservative audience at a hustings. It was down south. The particular context upon which she was talking was that of the Union. So I think it was clear she was talking about constitutional matters. Nicola Sturgeon essentially should be ignored when it comes to her constant constitutional drum beating. That's exactly what Liz meant. What she has since followed up with, if you like, is the fact that she is willing to work with the First Minister of Scotland, as she should be, when it comes to assisting with those matters that are in the remit of Holyrood. Unfortunately, Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP apparently don't like to spend very much time dealing with those matters.
But she knew how it would go down, and she got the reaction, she got the laugh from the audience. It was a personal attack, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, I don't think you should underestimate how such comments and how such a direct challenge to Nicola Sturgeon would be positively received within the membership, both down south and here in Scotland. There is a view sometimes that the Conservatives need to take the gloves off more and stop entertaining Nicola Sturgeon when it comes to constitutional matters over which he has no remit.
Yeah, and the big question, the Tories still presumably have got no chance north of the border. So did this actually matter politically?
Well, certainly the Nationalists are the number one political party from the point of view of electoral performance, but the Conservatives at the last two Scottish elections have put in record-breaking performances. We are the primary opposition, and it certainly does matter. If we think back to Theresa May's somewhat disastrous general election, it was Scottish MPs that stopped a Jeremy Corbyn Labour government, so it absolutely matters what happens in Scotland.
And just on the fact of when we're looking at the Tory party and how they're organising the leadership election, should someone have told her, look, you're giving a gift to Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP by doing this? They love to be painted as the victims.
I don't think it was a gift to Nicola Sturgeon. One thing the SNP, as you suggest, are very good at is very much playing victim. But it wouldn't matter what or how reasonable Liz Truss's comments would have been. The nationalists would have sought to make hay with it. A lot of manufactured outrage from the SNP, but a lot of support from the unionist side in Scotland for Liz Truss's comments.
Nick, thank you very much indeed for bringing us the view there on, another row involving the candidates. Thank you very much for your time, but let's now move on to international matters and the growing crisis in Taiwan at the moment. China, of course, resuming its military activity today. Planes and ships once again crossing the so-called median line between the island and the Chinese mainland. Well, this comes just a day after ballistic missiles, no less, were launched into waters surrounding Taiwan, provoking an alarmed response from Japan. It all follows the visit of US Speaker Nancy Pelosi to the island earlier this week, which has provoked a furious response from Beijing. But Pelosi herself has now vowed that the US will not let the Chinese isolate Taiwan and has defended her visit by saying it was not motivated by self-interest. Well, joining us now is defence analyst and former British Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Colonel Crawford, thank you for joining us. Pelosi herself describing this as sabre-rattling, but it seems to be, well, a lot of sabres being rattled in a lot of different directions, a risk perhaps of a mishap or a miscalculation.
Yes, good afternoon. There's always a risk of a mishap or miscalculation when training with military weapons or military-grade weapons is involved. But my personal view is that China's reaction to Speaker Pelosi's visit is rather akin to a tantrum when a child throws its toys out of its pram. The US attitude towards China and Taiwan is often characterized as being one of strategic ambiguity. I think it's now beginning to verge slightly on strategic confusion. But I don't think at the moment there's any real risk of there being an all-out conflict between China, Taiwan or the USA.
You share this view. If the Chinese were intent on invading, they'd have done it by now.
Well, it's a very difficult operation. First of all, although the Chinese has got an impressive military inventory, it's not part of its historical doctrine or training to do large-scale assaults from the sea. And other people have said that should China want to do this, it would make D-Day look like a paddle along the shoreline. Such are the complexities and difficulties it would face. My personal view is that it would be foolish for China to attempt this in the face of Taiwanese and possibly US defense, and it would fail.
You said possibly. I mean, the White House has kept its counsel, but we assume that behind the scenes there are military plans there for a defence. How capable could the US be of keeping the island safe?
Oh, well, I'd be astonished if the US military planners haven't war-gamed this for many decades. And I think that although China has an impressive military, as I said before, it still isn't up to a strength where it can compete with the US, and not just with the USA, because the US has allies in the region, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Vietnam even. So it would be China would be up against a pretty impressive coalition. And at the moment, that would deter China, I would think, from any idea of making a military move in the short term.
Colonel Crawford, thank you very much indeed for your expert analysis. Thanks for joining us here on GB News. Well, let's remind you that Vicky is still with us and your Bank of England governor for the day. I hope you're enjoying your new job. And we have a new Prime Minister as well. Welcome to you. Should we reflect on the fact that your Foreign Secretary is still missing in action? Is this actually an important point with all these things going on? We haven't got, seemingly, a working government in place at the moment.
That's right. It's a government in paralysis. You have a Chancellor who is on holiday, and I don't begrudge anybody a holiday, but when the Bank of England are putting out their predictions, you want your Chancellor to be around, and your Foreign Secretary, when you've got situations such as Ukraine and now in Taiwan, you want them to be focused on the job. And unfortunately, this is what happens during leadership contests. We've seen it before. Government goes into shutdown, important decisions are put off until, well, at the moment, September. It may well be too late at that point.
Yeah, and Vicky, let's pick up on that in terms of the economic problems, because there are a lot of people saying we need immediate measures now to get in place to cope with the energy costs and the fact that people are really struggling already with food prices and fuel prices.
And of course, it isn't just food prices and fuel prices. It's also the whole issue of components and everything else coming from China. We've just been hearing about the problems.
Good point.
So, as a governor, I'd be
computer
quite...
chips for
Yes,
cars and so on.
Indeed, I'd be quite worried about the fact that we, in a way, from a political viewpoint, underestimated what Russia was going to do and the impact that this will have on energy costs. And now, of course, if there is any increased tension with China more generally, the world outlook that we're facing may also get slightly worse.
Underestimating Russia, but overestimating Chinese intent, do you think? Is that fair enough to say?
Not necessarily. I think we've underestimated also the actual problems that there are in China themselves in terms of being able to cope with the demand and the sort of supply misallocation that took place. We've got, at the same time, of course, the pilots that we've seen can sort of go and do their job. But we have China closing down in various parts because of COVID. And that, of course, accentuates everything.
Thank you very much indeed to our new governor and to our new Prime Minister. Great to have you. We're coming back after the break. Stay with us.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.